Welcome to the Amplified Podcast, where we get to have some really interesting conversations with some, really great people. Today's guest, Mr. AJ Hinch, husband to Aaron, dad to Haley and Caitlin, former manager of the Astros, former Major League Baseball player, currently the manager of the Detroit Tigers. AJ, welcome. Really appreciate you. Really appreciate you being here.
No, great setup. I'm excited to talk.
I see you got a cocktail, as we often do on this show. What are you drinking today?
So I'm drinking an old fashioned, which is kind of the drink of choice any time of the day. Which has been, I'm through friends and family and good times has become my go-to whenever someone says, "Hey, you want a cocktail?" I'm like, "Yeah, give me an old fashioned." And it's a good test for your friends who claim to be bartenders and really any restaurant that I go to, I'll give it a test.
Awesome. Well, I know there's been a bit of game changer on your old fashions of late. Tell everybody what you're doing different.
It's funny. You can go through a cocktail. It tells you a lot about what you like. So if I labeled what I like in drinks, I would say coffee is one. I would say wine is another. Bourbon has been an acquired taste over certainly my time in Texas, but adding a little bit of coffee liqueur to your old fashioned has been a game changer. It just takes a little bit of the sweetness out of it, gives a little bit of the coffee taste. Full disclosure, I learned it through you, and you're the expert in that. But it's not that I can't have an old fashioned without one, but I will prefer one, even to the point of like restaurants, bars, other people's houses. That will be a question I bring up. Hey man, you have any coffee liqueur you can pop in there? And when it's a yes, it's usually a double.
So how long have you been a bourbon guy?
How long have I been in Houston? Let's see. I live in Houston and I've been here for 6 or 7 years, maybe going on my 8th year. And I would say the first time I became a bourbon fan was within that timeline. I never really got into bourbon that much, didn't know a ton about it. Started hanging out with my friends in Houston, and that became a choice. And I would kind of fake it early where they would pour bourbon and I would like, yeah, I like bourbon, no problem. Like, and the more I learned about it, the more I've branched out a little bit. I know enough to be dangerous, not enough to be like smart about it, but I know what I like and I roll with it.
So we're planning to do a little walk through AJ's life.
Oh boy!
Okay? So
pack a lunch.
If you're okay with that, we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
we'll just kind of start all the way at the beginning. I know there's a lot of things we want to talk about there. You okay if we
Totally.
just take a walk through AJ's life and we'll kind of see where it goes. First question though, just audience wise, what's your connection to AEGIS?
You, I got to know you shortly after the 2017 World Series, and became instant friends. And I didn't know it was going to grow into such a close attachment at the time, and a bond that is really unbreakable. Where common interests, wives are friends, kids are friends. We've shared a lot of experiences together, and now I'm trying to be your brand ambassador with the AEGIS gear that you've provided. But yeah, it's I've learned a little bit about your business just through talking shop, over around a golf or an old fashioned, or just riding the car to various places. You've come up to Detroit a few times, check out some baseball. So life experiences bring you into arenas that you knew nothing about, but learn to appreciate.
So safe to say for the audience, this isn't our first old fashioned.
It's not our first. It's our first one on a podcast talking about my life. But that's about the extent.
I don't know the over under on 1,000.
It's probably right about it's a good mark. Good Vegas
over the last number of years. All right, so let's start. So you're born in Iowa. Yeah. I'm not sure many people grew up in Oklahoma. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I what I remember as a kid and even now through my own kids, I start to realize as I've moved them around the country. When they say, "Where are you from?" You really kind of refer to like your favorite places, or what your first memories. And my first memories were more in Oklahoma. A little bit of Denver, Colorado. That's why I like the Broncos. That's why I like John Elway. But for the majority of my childhood, from first grade on, I lived in Oklahoma. My extended relatives are in Iowa. My roots are truly in Iowa. But my sort of meaningful childhood was all in Oklahoma. And kind of the middle America, middle class, all American life was built in Midwest City, Oklahoma.
You know, I've heard you say the phrase a lot of times, "Do it right or do it again."
Yeah.
I'm guessing that had something to do with growing up there. And tell me more about that.
Yeah. So do it right or do it again is something I use it now in coaching, parenting, try to hold myself to that high bar. It really was my dad. My dad was my best friend growing up. We were super close. My parents had kids at a super young age, got married right out of high school and started having kids. And I have an older sister, and then it was me. And then I learned sort of the value of doing it right or do it again because my dad. If the lawn wasn't mowed perfectly and every blade of grass was captured, I had to go do it again. If the edging on the sidewalk wasn't done perfectly, I had to go do it again. If we washed the car in the driveway, something I still do to this day, and the streaks in the car, we didn't dry it fast enough, and there were streaks, we had to do it again. It was incredible. Like I hated it growing up. I was frustrated every time I had to do something a second or a third time. But it really instilled a perfectionist um, mindset for me that I value a ton. I mean, my kids hate that I use it on them, but they will appreciate it later. My players hate that I make them do drills over again until we get it right, but they will appreciate it when we start winning. It's kind of been a life theme for me.
All right. So most people think of you as connected to baseball.
Yeah.
We're going to talk plenty about that, but your high school had a pretty incredible football background with some pretty
Yeah.
amazing players that ran through there. And you were quite a football player, so
Yeah. So Oklahoma's football roots, football over baseball or any other sport. And my high school was no different. We had the Gundy brothers. One has gone on to be the head coach at Oklahoma State. The other went on to be a coach at Oklahoma. Both played professionally for a bit. We had a string of quarterbacks that went Division I, which get recruited out of high school back then. Way different than it is now, but it was important for this school to kind of feed programs and play football. So I broke that string from a football perspective, other than I could have gone and played football, but baseball was my kind of true love, true passion. But Friday Night Lights, that I know was built in Texas, was lived in Oklahoma, where we would draw 10,000 fans on a Friday night. It was nationally ranked teams. It was state championships was the bar at my high school. Never won one, got to the finals once, threw a couple picks, and we lost. But I love football. I love baseball. Baseball was more of like a career path. Football was a little bit more of a passion. And in the state of Oklahoma, similar to Texas, it's kind of a ritual on Friday nights.
well, so safe to say your high school baseball career was pretty successful. Gatorade Player of the Year.
Yeah, that was cool. That
yeah.
was a really cool experience. And we've had a local kid, Logan Baker, Lucan Baker, is won it as well out of the Woodlands. And a couple of years ago, I had a chance to call him as an alum on the Gatorade Circle of Champions Player of the Year. And I still have the plate. I show my kids. They don't really want to hear about the glory days, but I cherish that because that was the first national exposure. I'm on Team USA. I sort of started getting recruited by college recruiters. And now you look back and there are the most notable player that won a regional award but didn't win the overall national award was Derek Jeter. Now our careers went a little different ways. And
well, I was going to say
he became a star and a Hall of Famer, but it is cool to look back. The gold-plated Gatorade trophy is still in my possession. It's very meaningful because I feel like that was my again, different than we didn't have social media. We didn't have a lot of exposure. I got to be in an ad in Sports Illustrated, and that was like a dream.
Well, and just for everybody who's watching, Gatorade Player of the Year, best amateur player in the United States, period, end of story.
Yeah, at that time, it was an incredible distinction. I think it's won publications feeling. But
well, who else was in the class? You mentioned
Preston Wilson, who ended up going to be in the big leagues. Brandon Pico ended up going to the big leagues. Ryan Luzinski, whose dad, Greg Luzinski, played in the big leagues for a long time. Ryan got drafted in the first round. What they did is every state got to nominate their winner. Then the regions, there was kind of a regional qualifier, and then all of a sudden they picked, the semifinalists, and I became the finalist. So kind of cool to look back at how my amateur career, kicked off.
So where'd you get drafted out of your senior year of high school?
So at high school, I was second rounder by the Chicago White Sox, and I wanted to sign badly. I wanted to be in the big leagues. By the time I was 21, it was a self-appointed goal for no reason other than I wanted to do it. What I didn't want is a sort of gray area decision-making process. I wanted it to be cut and dry. The bonuses today, you think about 20, 25 years ago, it's way different. But I thought I was going to sign and go into pro ball and be a major league player and live out the dream. When I got drafted in the second round, which I think was like 63rd overall, that became a disappointment, which looking back is like, how can I be disappointed to be the 63rd player picked in a draft? But it became a question whether you should sign or not. I had a Stanford scholarship. I thought everything was going to be perfect, and it became a decision point on whether I should sign for what then was, super significant money coming from Middle America, or I had this Stanford education waiting for me, and luckily my parents influenced me to continue on in college.
Talk to me about that. Oklahoma to Stanford.
Yeah,
I mean that's a
big leap.
That's a big leap.
Yeah, it is. I mean, California. So we went to LA for the Olympic Festival for Team USA. So every summer from about my 14, 15 year, when I was 14 or 15, I played on Team USA, and I would travel the country with wearing Team USA on my chest. And it was really, really eye-opening for me, kind of kid from Oklahoma who didn't really know what was out there. When I got to LA, I started getting nationally recruited a little bit more, and Stanford was one of the schools that started to look at me. And my philosophy, and my dad's and my mom's, was go find the best place academically and athletically that you can go. Stanford was clearly the best at all of that, from a degree standpoint to a athletic standpoint on the baseball field, to the kind of what it can do for you later in life, which is an 18-year-old. You don't care. I mean, it's your parents are ones guiding you in that. And I chose Stanford. So I didn't know anything about Stanford. I'd never been really to California other than that trip to LA. But boy, am I glad that I made that choice.
Yeah, makes sense. For someone who grew up in Atlanta, we refer to Stanford as the Berry College of the West.
Right.
So, I think that's
which, you should always shoot for things higher than what you are. Stanford being the prettiest campus, the best school, the best degree, the best athletic program, the Sears Cup, which it's now called something different, but the best overall athletic program. We dominate in 32 sports. Like Barry should shoot to be that.
We have an ongoing joke. Yeah, I'm a Barry College grad, which most people don't know where Barry College is.
Yeah, why would you?
Flip back and forth between 1 and 2 most beautiful campuses in the world, and so it's funny to watch those rankings come out every year.
This
Stanford did flip to number 1 this year, so I can't say anything about that.
That's right.
We'll always be larger though.
Yeah, you will.
You
will. You have more space. We have higher quality.
All right, so baseball came pretty easy at Stanford. I think you had a obviously a great career there. Yeah. 3-time All-American?
Yeah, no, 3-time All-American. I had an incredible career there, great experiences. I ended up being around a lot of really cool people. Tiger Woods was there during my year. Chelsea Clinton was there during my year. Fred Savage for those old school wonder years. Alyssa Milano. Like, there were just a lot of people that filtered through Stanford, and I started to realize it's a lot of successful people that I got to be around, which was cool. I mean, Google was being formed in Silicon Valley. Like, it just, that went from web TV, the throwback web TV, to what we now know as the internet. I mean, it's my first email address, which again, today's kids will have no clue what that was like, transitioning from how did you get a hold of your friends? How did you get to hang out in college? How did you know where everybody was? You talk to people. And so when my Stanford experience on and off the field was awesome. Individually, we got to go to the College World Series. I did a lot of Team USA stuff. It ended with the Olympics in '96. I mean, things that I never dreamed of as a kid, I got to experience.
Yeah, you're right on the college experience. As a freshman, I was dialing up to the internet.
Totally.
Right? And that was revolutionary at the time. And so you're right. People
I remember the first time
we got to see both sides of that.
This is how we realize we're older, is the I remember when stories that our kids will roll their eyes, but they will soon appreciate a little bit more. But they had to talk me into getting an email address in college. Like, what do I need an email address for? Like, I don't want you to get a hold of me. I don't want you to send me anything on the internet. We didn't understand it. We had one computer at the end of the into the hallway in our freshman dorms. And, we kind of fight over that time to kind of explore this thing called the World Wide Web.
Amazing time. So you fast forwarded through a couple of things. I want to come back and talk a little bit about the Olympics. Really important thing, devastating thing happened while you're in college. Lost your dad.
Yep.
What was it like getting that call?
So I was 18, and my dad and mom had kids young. So right out of high school, they went to prom together. Next thing you know, they're having kids and getting married and developing a life in kind of rural Iowa. And what that allowed me to be was really close to my dad, both in age, but also in just like friendship and bond and the father-son relationship that you dream of. And that we work as. We're both dads. We want our kids to cherish anything that we can experience with them. When I went away to college, had no idea, obviously, that this was going to happen in February of my freshman year. So the fall went through.
So the season
hadn't started. No, he never got to see me play a college game. So I practicing on the field, and I get summoned to the office, which is super rare. It never happens. And they tell me that my dad's passed, and my college coach had to be the bearer of those news. My mom couldn't talk about it on the phone. So my high school coach is actually the one that told me over the phone. And I immediately went into meltdown mode. Because in my world, I'd be the first to tell you, I've had a super privileged baseball life, like the All-American life, the tournaments, the awards, the trophies, the Team USA experience, scholarship to Stanford. Like, this was the first blip on the radar. I had a pretty good gig as an All-American life until my dad passed, and that was the first sign of adversity. And I'm all the way out in California, solo. So created an incredible bond with my college coach, Mark Marquis. My mother ended up moving out to Palo Alto for my college 4 years. My world was rocked, and I went home. Spent about a week at home, missed a few games, and the heartbreaking part amongst all the different parts is, like, my mom gave me his briefcase, which old school briefcase. My dad carried it to work every day, and in it was a printed ticket, which again, something nobody understands anymore. Printed airline ticket to come watch me play the next week. He was going to surprise me and come to one of my college games, but he didn't make it.
So I don't want you to blow over Coach Marquis. I've heard you talk a lot about how much he means to you.
Yeah. So the adult male figures, he's super impressionable, quite a man who, days you love him, days you hate him. I mean, I got into coaching a little bit, and I see myself kind of experience a little bit of what he brings to the table. But yeah, I think the bond of him being there for me at the lowest point of my life to date, and I think that his influence, like, he had 3 daughters, never had a son. From that day forward, I kind of always felt like the one son that he didn't have, because he treated me that way, and I try to pay that back to the players that I get close to now as a coach.
Yeah, certainly a legend in baseball. For those who didn't play with him, that's a person we all just respect.
And you respect him. You stay in touch with him. You never want to disappoint him. I mean, I know we're going to get into kind of my professional life eventually, but he's in the inner circle.
That's great. So you kind of had a bit of a freak injury when you were at Stanford, as I recall. Of all things, going back, just diving back into first base.
Yeah. So I had turned down the draft for a third time. In going into the college, I turned down money and turned down the draft to go in my junior year. And I slid into first, and I stand up, and my shoulder, my arm's pointing the wrong direction. And so I was a prospect in college, and you're always looking towards the draft. And you can get drafted after your senior year in high school, your junior year in college, and your senior year in college. And so, I turned some money down, and when your shoulder's pointing the wrong direction, it was pretty bad. Now, I wouldn't let him take me out of the game. Trainer comes out, pops it back into place. I run the bases. I get my gear on. I was a catcher, so I went out behind home plate, and I couldn't lift my arm above my shoulder. And so my mother's in attendance. A ton of scouts are in attendance, and I have to walk off the field and then walk down the right field line to go to the clubhouse. And 15, 20 scouts are walking with my mother to kind of go try to figure out what happened. And so again, first sign of adversity on the field, because I'd never been injured. The risk you take by going back is like, will that money ever be there? More importantly, I was mad because I had to come out of the game. And that's like, I didn't want to not play.
Well, you get better. You get drafted for the third time after your senior year. How'd you feel about that? Who was it?
Yes.
Where'd you report?
So I went the first summer when I got drafted. So June is when the draft is. And the dates have varied over the years. But I got drafted in the third round out of my senior year by the Oakland A's. The only issue with that season was that we were going to play in the Olympics. So you couldn't sign as an amateur until after you satisfied all of your amateur stuff. We were still amateurs at the time. Now they can play professional players in the Olympics. But in the 96 Olympics in Atlanta, we were amateurs, all college kids. Now, Japanese bring in professional players. Cuba's bringing their professional players. Nicaragua's bringing a few professional players. We were a bunch of kids trying to win a gold medal in the Olympics. And I definitely wasn't going to sign if I had the opportunity to be the captain of the Olympic team. So I go to Atlanta and don't think anything of it. I end up signing after the Olympics. We won the bronze medal. I go to instructional league in Phoenix, Arizona for the Oakland A's. And that was the first time I realized what professional baseball was all about. It's like, in college, I'm one of 2 or 3 catchers. I'm kind of the guy in front and center. I'm the All-American. I got to all this publicity, all this notoriety. And I go to pro ball and I look around, there's 8 catchers in instructional league. Some from the Dominican Republic, some from Venezuela, some from the previous draft, some from that are AAA guys that are close to the big leagues, and me. And so I looked around like, it's not just about me anymore. There's a bunch of people. You kind of go from big fish in a small pond to whatever size fish you are in a monster pond of players. And we look out, and little did I know, later in spring training, there's 200 kids. They're not kids, they're men that are roaming fields trying to make it to the big leagues. How naive was I that
Sure.
that going from this bubble of college and the Olympics to now pro ball, and I was going to have to fight my way to the big leagues.
All right, so I'm going to tie some things together here. So somewhere in there, you meet Erin Murray.
Yeah.
How'd that happen?
So Erin, my wife of 20, almost 24 years, we were a blind date. So after my first year in pro ball, I'm going to play in this.
I'm going to make you back. You're a blind date. I'm not going to, like, there's a deeper story there about a picture on the refrigerator. I'm not letting you go.
It was
one-sided
blind date. We say blind date because, like, if it's half a blind date, it's a full blind date. We were, after my first year, I got drafted by the A's, like I talked about. Play our season. I'm going to play in the Arizona Fall League, which is a professional league that some prospects go to, extra time, extra at bats, or whatever. And it's in Scottsdale, and a real good place to enjoy the off season. And my my agent's assistant, who takes care of all the kind of business associate stuff, and whether it's, administrative stuff all the way to and just player procurement. And she had said that she had a friend of hers at Arizona State that I'd be a perfect match for. Like, I don't know. Like, so we go out on the town a little bit, enjoy. We end up going back, kind of continuing the night. And there's a picture on a refrigerator. I'm like, hey, who's that? She's like, that's the friend that I want to set you up with. And so I'm like, all right, when? She's like, as soon as you want. And so I'm like, okay, how about next week? So I get a call that I have this number now, and she's willing to go out on a date with you. Now, Erin will tell the story that she wanted no part of it. The baseball life, the athlete, that's just not something Erin really grew up valuing at all. She didn't like sports, but she took the date. I called her. She denied my first request because it was Halloween. She wanted to go hang out with her friends. But then in early November, we went out for pizza and a movie, and began this courtship that ended in marriage.
So you've already said we're close friends and our wives are close friends. So one of my favorite stories. Okay.
Oh boy.
What is the big leagues?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I can only imagine what that was like for you, given everything you just said.
So yeah. All right. So we're in our early 20s at this point, and we're going to go to this place called Oregano's in Scottsdale. If anybody ever goes to Arizona, it's a great pizza pasta bistro, super casual, one of my favorite places I've ever been. And we go there, and I sit down, and like, I'm this athlete. I've been picked high. I've gone to the Olympics. I'm now a professional. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to be in the big leagues next year. And Erin looked at me square in the face, like, what's the big leagues? And I'm like, the big leagues, the major leagues. She's like, nope, I don't really know what you're talking about.
And so that is the moment.
That's the moment. I'm like, I'm going to keep this girl. I got to figure out how to not to mess this up, because, I think it's just so awesome that, and how innocent, naive, super, trustworthy, that she was taking this date invested in me and see if we could make it work, and not the glitz and glamour of what professional baseball can be. And it's become a long-standing joke. I'm not sure she really understands now, after 20 plus years, what the big leagues is like, because she refuses to let me get all caught up in the professional side.
Well, we all need that person in our life that just, we think what we think what we do is a big deal, exactly. And sometimes we need that humbling force.
Exactly.
And, that's just one of my favorites. All right, so okay, she follows you around. I mean, you bounced around a fair bit.
Everywhere. That poor woman. We had kids pretty early, and she's dragging kids around to, from Oakland to Sacramento, which is where the AAA was, to Kansas City, Omaha, which is where their top affiliate, to Detroit, Toledo. I kind of hit every stop. Philadelphia, spring training, and we bought a house in Phoenix because that's where she's from. And spring training, half the teams are there. As soon as we got married, I never played for another Arizona-based team the rest of my career. So, like, best laid plans didn't work. She's been a rock star because of the sacrifices she's made with our girls. But baseball's taken us to a lot of places that we'll look back on, as things wind down, that as a place that, or as a time in our life that we value.
Before I talk more about professional baseball, Haley and Caitlin.
Yeah.
Tell me, I know how important they are to you.
They're everything. And they, it's funny, like, God works in mysterious ways. And I think the fact I've been in baseball forever, you look around, you're like, so I never had a brother. I consider you as close to my brother as anybody in my life. But I feel like teammates around my career, these 5 or 6 major league teams and all these minor league teams, has created a great brotherhood with a bunch of people. As I became a father, and a coach, which is very similar, I realized, like, there's a reason I never had a son. I've got 26 of them every season on my team. And so I get that separation. It softens me up a little bit at home. I'm a girl dad. I'm proud of it. They are every bit what I would have dreamed of. If you would have said, hey, you can draw up 2 daughters, I would draw up Haley and Caitlin in a minute. We had kids early, similar to my parents, similar to Aaron's parents. We're going to be empty nesters before we're 50. That's unheard of. But I think that watching them grow up and being able to share both my professional and personal side with 2 of the best has been a blessing.
All right. You get your first call up.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that conversation. How did it happen? I dreamed of doing that. I never got a chance to do it.
So I went to spring training in 1998 as a prospect, young kid. I'd played 1 year in pro ball. I'd performed well, but you never really think. My first spring training in 1997, I look to my left and it's Mark McGwire. I look to my right, it's Jose Canseco. I look across the way, it's Ricky Henderson. Just players that I grew up like watching and idolizing. So when in spring training the following year, Canseco's gone, McGuire's gone, but Ricky Henderson is there. And I get called into Art Howe's office. Now, they've made movies about this A's movement, Moneyball, and it was before Moneyball, but I distinctly remember getting called up into the office and Art Howe asking me if I've ever been to an opening day. And Art Howe, who's got Houston ties, he lives in Houston, longtime manager, coach, player. And I'm confused. I'm like, no, I've never been to opening day. I've always been in school. And he's like, well, you're going to experience your first opening day in the big leagues. And it didn't really register to me. I didn't really think about it. And he's like, and you're going to be the starting catcher. And that moment of like, I made it, like I did it. I didn't even experience anything yet. It's just been simple spring training in Phoenix. But it meant something to me that I immediately missed my dad. I couldn't share it with him. Called my mother, called my college coach, and let him know that I was going to be a big leaguer. I'll take care of the tickets, get your plane ticket and come out and see the debut. I debuted in Oakland in April of 1998 against Pedro Martinez of the Boston Red Sox. And that kickstarted a career that's taken a lot of twists and turns, but I could forever call myself a big leaguer at that moment.
And I know it's been interesting to watch you as now that I know you as a manager.
Yeah.
You can tell how special that first call up is because you take it very seriously.
Yeah.
I know we talked about a couple of guys last year, Torque and Riley Green, on
Yep.
making that really special. I mean, that's how important that moment is.
There's only one first time where you feel like you made it, and I'm sure it's the similar in business where you close a deal or you buy that first house, you buy that first car, like any time where you feel sort of independently successful, you'll remember it. So I've taken that to heart in my managerial career, that every time at the end of camp, if someone's going to make their big deal, there's 2 opportunities to make it special for them. One is when you tell them. So last year I have Miguel Cabrera, a future Hall of Famer, played 19, 20 years in the big leagues, Triple Crown winner. I had him sit in with Spencer Torkelson, who was the first overall pick and was going to make our team to make it special. When you can create an experience for them so that maybe someday they tell their kids or they tell their friends or they tell their loved ones what it was like to finally make it, that stems from what it meant for me to be a big leaguer.
So I'm going to maybe a couple of quick ones.
Yeah.
Most intimidating pitcher you ever faced?
So Roger Clemens hit me in my head after I homered off of him. So that's
and you still get to see Roger.
I get to see Roger a little bit. I had his son on my team. That's important to distinguish. I mean, like to make a distinction. John Smoltz, Greg Maddux. Like I got to face like icons in the sport. Because I made it to the big leagues so fast as a 23-year-old. I turned 23 when I made it. Like it's like Maddux, Smoltz, Glavine, Pedro, Randy Johnson, future Hall of Famers. Like at the time, you don't know it. But now looking back, you're like, man, I had a great era of pitcher, Curt Schilling, that I faced at some point. I would say that the biggest name who wasn't himself at that point was Dwight Gooden. You remember Doc Gooden as a 19-year-old New York Met throwing breaking balls and embarrassing hitters. Now he was older, had nothing compared to that kind of stuff. But for me, if I collected your baseball card, like that was a big deal. When Cal Ripken stepped in the batter's box, that was a big deal. When Barry Bonds stepped in the batter's box and I'm a catcher, like I didn't know whether to call him like Mr. Bonds or Barry or what. It's kind of a surreal experience. So when I got to hit against Dwight Gooden, it was just full circle. Like this was me as a kid. I faced Dwight Gooden. It was just in my backyard with a wiffle ball with all these rules and lawn chairs set up as first baseman. And like, we were kids.
Well, and you just mentioned Smoltz, Glavine, Maddox. We all who were baseball players of any level, all were Braves fans, right? Because TBS was the only thing you could see.
And WGN, the Cubs would play during the day, and you'd be at school. So I was a Braves fan growing up because of that. But I still to this day, like, fear factor, Roger Clemens, because he didn't ever flinch. These other guys were like artists, like Randy Johnson and Pedro a little bit, but mostly Roger was like mean. Like he wanted to destroy you. They didn't care.
Most memorable moment as a catcher.
So as a catcher, two things stand out. One, when saves were less notable. Like 300 saves used to be a really big number. If you think about like 30 saves a year, 10-year career, the way numbers work. I caught Roberto Hernandez's 300 save. We had a big issue about that. That was cool. I was 1 out away from a perfect game with Kenny Rogers. And I'm sorry, not perfect game, no hitter. And a no hitter, and Dave Martinez, who is now a peer of mine as a major league manager. He was the manager who beat me in the World Series in 2019. Really successful post-career. Broke it up in the 9th inning. And I always wanted to catch a no-hitter in the big leagues. And so that maybe it's not like it was a deflating feeling, but it's still the most memorable because I was a couple outs away from history. Oh yeah, sure. No, the debuts to me are also really big. Like, so that the big three in Oakland that came after the famous Oakland teams were Barry Zito, Tim Hudson, Mark Mulder, got to catch their debuts. And now looking back, and this is probably not how I felt at the time, anytime you have an opening day, like a big opening day experience, fans, the nostalgia, the ribbons all around the field, the lineups get called to the line. I got to catch a couple opening days. That would rank right up there.
All right, so you bounce around a bit in the majors, take some front office jobs, end up as a manager, 34 years old. Second youngest manager of all time?
La Russa.
Right? By a few days, right? What was that like?
Brutal. Just because I wasn't really ready for it. And again, I try to always relate it to real life because it is real life. But what we do for a living oftentimes gets put up on a pedestal or gets put off in this little like space. It's the same when you take a new job. It's the same when you go to a new school. It's the same when you have a life experience you've never done before. It just is highlighted because it's professional sport. I wasn't ready at all for the position from a operational standpoint. I was very ready from a leadership standpoint. But taking over in a volatile time, it was not accepted. Now, you watch NFL like I do, or the NBA or baseball now. There will be inexperienced coaches that get the job and nobody really says anything about it anymore. Maybe a little bit Jeff Saturday with Indianapolis, or maybe, when a new coach gets hired, in baseball, and they're like, oh, wow, this guy has no experience. I was one of the first ones to do that. I had never coached before. Josh Burns, who hired me, was relying on my leadership skills to take over this team and hopefully make a big impression. It was met with a ton of resistance. So when you looked up, like, the lonely feeling was like, no one's rooting for you. No one really wants you to do well. The criticism is immense because I could make the same mistake as a 10-year manager, but my mistake was going to be magnified. It just was, I mean, I'll never forget, like, my first time walking out on the field as the manager. There's like a 60-year-old woman with a poster board that says, like, what does AJ stand for? A joke. And I'm like, welcome to coaching when not everybody is like on board with you being the right person. And that was an eye opener for me that I'm going to be judged by wins and losses and nothing else. Like, how I articulate in the media, how I operate, how I move the needle with the players, it's wins and losses when it comes to coaching.
So let's, practically speaking, you're 34.
Yeah.
How many players on the team were older than you?
So,
roughly,
handful. I would say 5 or 6. I had Tom Gordon, who was about to retire. I had Tony Clark, who went on to be the Players Association president. I had a handful of players. So I was 34. We probably had 5 or 6 guys that were older than me, but most of the players were my peers. Eric Burns, I'd hosted on a recruiting trip at Stanford, played with him in Oakland, against him my whole life. Scott Schoenweiss, I was on Team USA with him as a teammate. I'm now his boss. Augie Ojeda was on the Olympic team with me. I'm now his boss. Stephen Drew, who I helped recruit as a potential draft pick. Then we ended up drafting him, he was on my team. Justin Upton, who I was more like kind of friendly with and as a mentor as a young kid, was on our team. So it was the transition from do it the way we've always done it to try something different and be a little bit more dynamic. It was met with resistance. And now, what was that? That was in 2009. So 10, 12, 14 years later, it's kind of common to go get what you perceive to be the best person, put him in a position, surround him with support, and then go. It doesn't matter now that Sean McVay is in his early 30s winning the Super Bowl, or, Craig Counsell and Alex Cora and Aaron Boone and these new age managers that never went to the minor leagues and coached. That's cool now. It wasn't cool in 2009.
So that doesn't last long.
No, a year.
Year. What'd you learn?
I learned a certain, bit of resilience. The resiliency is needed to lead. I learned, now I'm looking backwards. So at the time I didn't know, but looking back after, coming to Houston, doing what we did in Houston, going to Detroit, being in Detroit, like, coaching is about resiliency. It's about creating a vision that we can chase. I was right on a lot of things that I was wrong in how to get it up and running. Like, I was raised in, like, when my dad told me to go mow the lawn again, I just did it. I didn't ask why. When, as a coach, as a player, if a coach told me to go do something differently, I did it. Like, I didn't ask questions. This generation and the generation that's going to be forward is going to say, why? Why do I have to do it? Our kids do it. Your kids do it. My kids do it. Why do I have to do this? And like, if I asked why, my dad would, like, ground me, right? Or I would be kind of reprimanded for questioning authority. Now it's common practice. So I learned leadership skills. I learned resiliency. I learned who to trust, who not to trust. I learned to find multiple paths to get to the same result. It's not just about my path. So but I didn't know at the time how much I was learning. I just thought the world was against me.
I'm going to fast forward. You went to San Diego, spent some time in the front office. You end up manager of the Astros, 2015. They hadn't been good. I mean, Complete rebuild mode.
Yep.
What got you excited about coming here?
So 10 years was the time zone between, or timeline between making the playoffs in 95 and 2015. I believed in the leader, Jeff Luhnow, who I had become friends with through the industry. I believed in the talent base. Like, you need talent to win in sports. You can have the right schemes. You can have the right, I know we all sit on the couch and we're like, I would do this, 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 and this. The reality is like, you'll only do all of those things that you think are best with the talent. You have to believe in the talent. And so with Houston, I believed where the talent base was. If you're as bad as long as Houston was, and you pick correctly, you can explode. The right draft picks, the right philosophy, the right opportunity, the upside is what you're chasing. And so when I got the opportunity to interview in Houston, everybody sees it in today's world of like, can I win today? With Houston, you had to have the vision. Can I win over the next 5 years? What I didn't know is how long they could keep it up. When I got here in 15, we had never made the playoffs in 10 years. We make the playoffs in 15. That was like an accomplishment in itself. We are now sitting in this studio, like, it's 2023. They haven't stopped winning. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. Like, they're still winning. And that's a talent base. It's philosophy. It's support from ownership. It is, but I was at the beginning.
Yeah.
I was able to pour a foundation.
I remember going to the playoffs that year. We didn't grow up, or we aren't from Houston originally. The feeling in the city, it was electric going to the playoffs. I remember going to those. You and I didn't know each other at the time, but it was, you had that sense that this could be really good for a while.
Oh yeah. So it was because of we were doing it with the young players. It's one thing, and we're all sports fans, or a lot of us are. It's one thing to do it with talent you buy. It's different when you do it with talent you build. And when you build it, you give yourself a little bit of ramp for success. So if you just kind of go buy, all of us want our favorite teams to go out and buy the best player. That's hard to sustain because of the unpredictability of performance. When you build it from within and you're like, there's a good player there, and we have an investment in it, the city grows with that. The city understands it. They've heard about these players. They see these players. They attach themselves to these players, and then they support these players. In Houston, they were everywhere. Correa, Springer, Keuchel, Altuve, Bregman, ended up being Gurriel, Tucker now. Like, there's an attachment to the city when you see the build, as opposed to going and buying the best free agent imaginable. You go and buy this person, this person, this person. If you can build it from within, you energize a fan base, you get buy-in from the players because they've kind of grown in your system, they've grown up in your organization, and then they flourish in the big leagues. And we saw that start to mature in 15. It got even better in 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. That's ended in multiple championships. 4 of those years are World Series appearances. That's kind of what a dynasty is called.
So let's go back to 17. World Series.
Oof.
I mean, unbelievable. Again, the city, electric. What's it like getting ready for your first World Series?
So let me take you back a month prior to that, because October was an incredible experience. And there's so many different narratives around 2017, which we can talk about, but I don't think any of us have fully captured what that year was like due to Hurricane Harvey. I understand that the cheating scandal has kind of marred a lot of the joy of that season, but we can't deny that the impact of Hurricane Harvey in 2017 in September. And the most nervous I've ever been on the field, I'm at my office. I'm at my peace. I'm like, I can handle 50,000 people. Doesn't do anything for me. Like, I'm good with major league players, star players, whatever. Stand up in front of a crowd after a hurricane and thanking people for the things they're doing in the community to help everybody survive was like an out-of-body experience that I'll never forget. I was the most nervous delivering a speech. I think it was like September 1st or 2nd. The first game back, we're playing the Mets. There's half the crowd is there, and everyone's just looking for some distraction away from the hurricane. That in itself, that story in itself in 2017 has been overshadowed by a lot of the other things, but I will walk away most proud of how our organization and our players and our people reacted to a travesty in its own right as getting a city through a hurricane.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up hurricane. I always have so much more empathy, for natural disasters anywhere. Once you go through something like that, you never, you can watch it on TV. You can think about how you're going to respond. You can have a lot of opinions or thoughts, but until you've lived through something like that, and there are fires and there are earthquakes and there are all sorts of bad things that can happen, but you're so much more empathetic when you see the impact of the people that you care about, the city that you love. It was a
what, and being real is in the Woodlands where where you and I both live was a little bit further removed from that. Like, we had some street flooding. Yeah, you have some difficult stretches, but what a total devastation, total wipeout, electricity out, the loss of life, the loss of like the life that you built in and around the bayous. We were able to recover, in the outlying areas extraordinarily well. We have no idea what it's like to experience that in the trenches where the devastation was the worst. Obviously, sports took me into those areas. And then we tried to pay it back with an experience and an outlet where they could get away from what they lost and look forward more to a team that was pretty good, and ultimately a champion.
Yeah. I'll remember the way the city pulled together.
Yeah.
When you see everybody from all walks of life, some were more fortunate than others, like we were, up here on the north side. But to see the number of people who pitched in and helped, and then to come out and have a championship that year, all of that was, you never want the script to be written that way, but it was, to your point, something that people forget a lot.
The other thing that, and I'm very grateful for the Astros opening these doors is immediately after the hurricane, we had a lot of access to outreach. So my kids and I, my wife, we all went to the convention center in packed bags with donated socks and blankets and toilet paper and products that many people in our city were struggling to get. Toothpaste. And my girls, and things you look back on, you don't really know at the time how important it is. My girls got to volunteer in an area that was way different than the area that they grew up in. Like, listen, I'm not denying the fact that we have been able to provide a lot for our girls, but the experiences you provide when they are vulnerable, when they're looking at this person just wants a pair of socks and shoes and a towel and soap, that to me was more powerful than anything I've ever done in baseball. That was more powerful in shaping their life goals of being empathetic, of being helpful, of being aware of the privilege that just by happenstance of where we live, we didn't suffer to the same extreme that everybody else did. You can't script that.
So, weight of the world's on your shoulders, coming back to getting ready for your first World Series. What's that like?
I don't think you think of it that way as much as you the childhood dream of going to the World Series, whatever you draw it up to be, times 100. It's not the same. seeing your team as there's the scoreboard, out of town scoreboard. We get so used to looking at the scoreboard and seeing 15 games, right? They're everywhere. And some days there's 12 because there's off days and whatever. But then all of a sudden in the playoffs, you see it broken down into half of that. And then all of a sudden you look like it whittles down. Like you look out on the out of town scoreboard, there's one matchup. It's you versus the Dodgers. Or in 19, it was you versus the Nationals. That in itself is a cool pressure. And you just want to be perfect. Now, my first World Series, I obsessed over things that I later didn't need to, but I think you over magnify it because you want to be over prepared. You want to be ready for the test. You want to have every scenario scripted out. You want to have your players ready. In reality, I think you needed just to sort of decompress and let your players compete with some 3 or 4 key principles that, hey, we need to get, to beat this team, we need to do X, Y, and Z. With LA, we needed to beat their bullpen because we knew that Dave Roberts was going to go to their bullpen early and not allow their pitcher to go a second or third time through the order. So we focused on how do we beat their bullpen and how do we control the middle part of their lineup, which was crazy good. But the preparation changed over the years.
Game 5.
Yeah.
What 13-12,
Yeah.
10 innings. What's it like managing a game like
Such
that?
an emotional roller coaster. And fortunately for me, I felt really good about our matchups, but I enjoyed that more than most. My kids and wife sat right behind me in the first row. And I remember going to the mound at one time and coming back, and you look straight. You try not to engage with the crowd too much, but the people over the dugout, you can usually see there's empty seats. My wife had gone up to she couldn't handle it. She went to the bathroom. She wanted to go throw up. She was like, I wasn't as stressed as everybody else was around me. I was more in disbelief. You don't know that you're in an instant classic until way after the fact. Other people that watch games, I know when I watch a football game and I'm like, this is an unbelievable game. Or I know when I watch a baseball game, wow, this is incredible. When you're in it, you're playing chess so much. This move, counter move. You don't really appreciate the game you're in. Now, when I watched it later that offseason, because I recorded all of them on TV so I could watch them back. And I've gone through with my kids and my wife, look at this. This is what I was thinking. You start to realize what a difference it is being a fan versus being a participant.
You win in Game 7 on the road, which, hey, look, World Series. You
win wherever you need to win.
But the real celebration happens. You get back into Houston. You're in a parade.
Yeah.
What does that feel like?
Blown away. The city of Houston is really responded. That 17 parade, I don't know how this year's was in 23, but in 17, it was such a release for the city. And the volume of people is one. You're on top of these buses and fire trucks and experiencing things. I have great pictures from it. The signs, the fans, the support. They said estimated seven-figure number of people downtown. Kind of an out-of-body experience because you've never been in that situation before. You have your jersey on, you're just waving to a million people. They just want a glimpse of the trophy or your best players or even yourself. And it's you just so much appreciation. What I learned from that, and I've always told myself since that day, soak up as much as you can, because that you can't get that feeling back. There's no. I walk around today and play. People will stop me at a restaurant or a bar or a mall and say, AJ, that was so cool. It's so nice to meet you. It's not the same feeling. The feeling of just soak it all up. I'm glad I took videos. I'm glad I took pictures. But I've appreciated that because, obviously they got to do it again in 23, but you don't get to do that in your lifetime very often, let alone twice.
So go to 19. You go back to the World Series. Is it different the second time or just as exciting?
So the preparation's different because you have experience. No matter what situation that you have, experience pays off. And so you know what to focus on, what not to focus on, where to spend your time, where to put your bandwidth, you have so much experience to draw from, having been we were in the World Series in 17, the ALCS in 18, the World Series in 19. You have a much better idea on where to spend your time. The emotions aren't different. You're like super amped, excited, nervous, making sure you cover everything, but you focus a little bit differently. You're more comfortable. Again, I relate it to life. Like just like anything else you do for the second time, then you're going to feel better. And in the World Series, it's no different.
Do you still pull Greinke for Will Harris? I know how much Will always meant to you, but I have to ask, would you still make the same call?
Yeah. So first off, 2019, and this, I don't want to be controversial, but like it was a better team. We had a better team in 19 than 17.
You heard it here first.
Yeah. We were loaded in 19 and heavy favorites, and we just didn't win game 1 or game 2. If you win game 1 or game 2, all of this stuff is probably for naught, because you kind of we didn't have to work so hard to get back. And so it's funny, what fans will always look back at the result and wonder if you do it differently, like of course it would have like things would have changed. To answer your question, I would have put Harris in again.
Good for you.
The process was right. The result wasn't. What I look at as a manager, what led to the game 7 decision is what happened in game 1 and game 2, game 3, 4, 5, and even game 6. Like we had a chance to like do better things in game 6 and game 7. I don't like the fact that everything is on that decision when it's not in context. I've said this as managing all along. Like we assumed the other way would have worked. If I leave Greinke in and he gives up a homer to Howie Kendrick, I'm getting roasted for not pulling Greinke. That's just the reality. I don't get offended. I don't get mad. I don't get emotional about it. The process was right. The result was bad. I'm more mad about game 1 and game 2 than I am about game 6 and 7. We should never have put ourselves in that position to where we had to sweep in Washington in order to even get it back to Houston in 19. Fans will never see it that way, but I do.
Is there ever another World Series where every home game gets lost?
Ever?
That's a fascinating thing that I'm not sure people will remember.
It's super unlikely.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why it happened that way. That's just sort of happenstance, because there's nothing as a team, there's nothing you do that like, oh, I play great at home, but not on the road, or vice versa. Our team was built for any ballpark. We had the best team in baseball. It's probably the best team I'll ever have on paper in my career. But we just didn't perform in that World Series at home, which was super rare. Some of that's to do with Steven Strasburg, who was really good at our ballpark in, I think it was game 1 and game 7. Some of that is, they had Max Scherzer. What it taught me a little more is like they can get away with a lot of pitching. Like the Nationals had really good pitching. Scherzer, Strasburg, Anibal Sanchez pitched pretty well that year. I mean, they got away with good pitching, but that one feels like it's always going to feel like it got away.
All right. So 19, disappointing.
Yeah.
You and I are really close at this point. End of 19, start of 20. I see you're on top of the world.
Yeah.
Do you remember what December of 19 and the beginning of January 20, what we were doing?
Yeah, I do, because we were, obviously spending as much time together as possible, whether it's holidays or anniversary trips. We went to Napa and had a great family trip, and went to Pebble and played in a golf tournament together. And it was sort of the calm before the storm.
Right. We literally left New Year's Day to fly out
to Pebble Beach.
Yeah. couldn't be more excited. You've got
I was
great team.
Yep,
You know,
have a great team
obviously
from 19. We lost game 7, but still we are primed to be really good for the foreseeable future. And I knew there was the investigation going on, and I knew that things were a little bit choppy, but I didn't know that the tidal wave was coming.
So I want to spend a little bit of time on this because I don't look, it's all been well vetted what happened, right? And we'll talk about your you've always been owning that. Don't care about that. What I got to see that I don't think people appreciate was the personal side of things, right? Of the cheating scandal. At the end of the day, you're a human being, right? Just like everybody else. And I had the fortunate, chance to see some of that. Talk about how it happened, your conversation with Jim. I mean, I believe you were genuinely surprised of the outcome, right?
Yeah. So I would say this. I was surprised at the magnitude. I was super naive to the damage that we did to the sport. I was naive to the massive penalty that I was going to serve. Looking back, I think I was naive. That we were in Pebble playing in a golf tournament with a couple friends, and I get the call that I got to go to the commissioner's office. I fly cross country. I have my suit because we don't travel in suits. I suit shipped to New York. I've got to meet the commissioner about the investigation that's going on. And I met with him in New York and left that trip. You took my daughters home back to Houston. When I got back to Houston, I knew things were going to start to solidify on what the plan was. I think everybody was surprised that it was coming to an end because the investigation was really long. I'm down in the clubhouse in Houston working on the 2020 spring training plan because I've always been very thorough with how I get our players ready for spring training. I meet with every player when we come in. I go over what their spring's going to be like. Why are you here? What do you need to do to get better? And how can we get you there? Ironically, that day I'm meeting with Jose Altuve and going over, I want him to do these things on defense. He needs to work on this on offense. We were going to hit him ground balls at Minute Maid. And so I'm down at Minute Maid in shorts and a t-shirt. And Crane calls, Jim Crane, our owner, and says, can you come into my office? Still thought nothing of it. Went up there in workout clothes. Think about going into your bosses, your ultimate bosses off to check in. And he lets me go. He's crying. I'm crying. Devastating day for my family, me personally. Go downstairs. I tell Altuve, can't hit your ground balls. I'm not your manager anymore. Explain it to him and pack up my stuff. And similar to anything with HR in businesses, I've got to pack my office and supervision and you feel like you are, kind of outside the organization. So get in my car and that conversation, I got to get to the most important stakeholders in my life.
I want to back up. I'm going to come back to that. I want to back up for a second. The night, the afternoon before all that happened and what ultimately became the night, you and I went out to Blue Jack. We played golf together. We were driving back, right, talking about this. You had a sense that I think the letter was coming. An end. Yep. And I remember asking you, what's the worst case scenario? Yeah. What's the worst case scenario? Right. And I remember you said, look, probably going to be 40 games, could be 80, half a season.
Sure.
Right. And so I think, I didn't think much more of it, fast forward now, you've got to start making those, but back to the punishment was so much different than any of us had prepared for. And then what that does to the moments afterwards.
So let me tell you why you would think anything differently, because it was unprecedented. There's no reason for us to have any understanding of where it should be. The steroids was the only thing, performance enhancing was the only thing that we had to go by. So most of those suspensions have been 81 games, like half a year. I don't think at that point anybody had suspended a full year for steroids. Nobody. So that's the naive part. It was like, you're just grabbing at past like practices on where things would be. So those were guesses on like, knowingly, unknowingly, where you were in the participation side of it. And so that's where the 80 games turned into, or 81 games turned into, is like half a season. That's what the steroid guys were getting. I don't think any of us really knew it was unprecedented, and that those were total guesses at the time. But when you get the news, regardless of the suspension side of MLB, just being like ousted as the manager, there is a small number of minutes you have until the media catches on. When the media catches on, you can't control Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever your social media outlet is. And you also can't the news, like the TV. So my lesson in that is like, you have a finite number of minutes until the world knows. And to me, there were a collection of people that needed to know. Wife and kids, mother, for me, would have been my dad too if he'd been alive. Inner circle friends. After that, like, I can't really get to everybody. Nothing against people I didn't text or didn't call and they found out on the news or social media. That was the important sort of stakeholders, as I call it, to me, to get to. And all, like, I happen to have Altuve. There were a couple players. I'm super close with George Springer. Obviously I had Altuve there, Carlos Correa. I was in Bregman. Like, my inner circle of players on the team, I tried to get to, but at the end of the day, it was an immediate family, my mother, my best friends, and then let the world blow up.
So I remember that day. I'm sitting literally 20 feet from here when the phone rings. Dive down into that, because this is now all out planning. Your daughters are at school, right? Yeah. Let's just focus on something that, I mean, it sounds simple, but as fans, it's easy to put things on Twitter or, say, but you have a family now that is that is out, not protected. We're not all sitting together. You're in full out planning.
So I have two teenage daughters that I'm in full panic mode to get them out of school. So all I called, it's funny, I didn't even tell my wife what happened. I said, get the kids out of school. I'll call you back. And she kind of knew, because like we'd communicated enough that things were going down. And so she's got to go and get the kids out of school to make sure. I don't want my kids sitting in class whenever the news breaks. Because no matter, I know it's not part of, and not everybody cares to the level in which I'm describing, but my kids do. One kid mentioned something in school about your dad got fired from the Astros. If I'm not the one to tell him, or my wife's not the one to tell him, I feel like it's a parental fail. So we got the kids out of school immediately. And I've got a 40-minute drive from downtown Houston to the Woodlands. So tell Aaron, go get the kids. They take them out of school, get home. She explains to them. I get to my inner circle friends, a few of my players, and then I'm trying to race home. When I get home, I walk into the press conference with Jim Crane explaining that they've fired me and Jeff. And my two kids and my wife, my 3 family members in tears. So I try to get the remote control, click it. Like, I lived it. I don't need to relive it again. So I turned it off. And we had a big family discussion about what happened, why I got let go. and tried to answer any questions they had on how it would impact their lives. My oldest daughter thought immediately we're moving. My youngest daughter totally confused and just wondering, like, is she ever going to get to go to a baseball game again? And me sort of sorting through the emotions of like letting down the people that rely on me to lead the family.
What was the toughest question they asked you?
Why? Like, why did you guys do it? Because there's no answer. I mean, you can make up one. You can talk about competitiveness. You can talk about, driving 60 in a 55. You can talk about, they're all guesses. Like, we had no reason. Like, it wasn't a plan. It wasn't like anything that we even articulated out loud. It wasn't an action plan or whatever you want to call it. So why was the biggest question? Because we've raised our kids transparency, honesty, do it right, do it again, right way and wrong way. And I failed in a lot of those areas. And we can talk about reasons and like logistics, and like we're looking back as like, I'm now a manager who has, after 17, managed in the ALCS in 18, World Series in 19, suspended in reflection in 20, go to a new team, building a culture in 21 and 22. If you look back now, you're like, God, what an idiot. Just like you would think about where AEGIS was 5 years ago, like, oh, why was I doing that? We're different people. We have different experiences. I'm way more of an emboldened leader than I was in 17. Doesn't mean I didn't fail in 17, but it means I would handle it a lot differently if my Tigers team did it the same as my Astros team. So like things that you take away from that. At the moment, having your teenage girls ask you why was the worst.
Well, and I really want to highlight what you said, because it was one of the most powerful things, given how close we were and are, that you said to me that exact thing, right? We're now in January of 20,
right?
Talking about something that happened in 2017. So we're 2.5, 3 years later. And you said that to me, and it's always resonated. Like, I had not won a World Series, right? At the time. I'm still a young manager who's been fired from my previous job, trying to make a name for myself. And there's things going on, right? With some pretty veteran players, on that team. And it seems easy to stop it. And it's not. And you did some things to try to do it.
Right.
But that's always resonated with me, that we're not the same leader today as we were. And look, I'm incredibly biased in this conversation because I care about you personally a ton.
Right.
But that's just a fact, right?
Yeah.
People don't realize that the manager you were at the time was not the same manager you were after having been through, multiple successful seasons.
So let me I mean, this is not a justification. We'll never justify our actions in 17, and this will be talked about. I'm sure I'll have to continue to talk about it, and I'll own it. The one thing that I've taken away from it that I will carry with me everywhere is the value of reflection. When you look back on anything in life, my parenting skills with my girls are 18 and 20 now. I look back like, oh man, could I have parented differently? Well, yeah, because I have life experience. Would I do anything differently from a financial standpoint? Yeah, I wouldn't invest in that because I learned that I lost money. How do I, my marriage, anything you do in life, you look back, the danger in doing that and not holding yourself with perspective is we're perfect now. We have all the answers. Would I do it differently? Of course. But I can't ever put myself back in that space where I know exactly how life is going to play out. We're living life in real time. And not to get overly philosophical, but all we know is what we know up to the minute, and that we're acting in a certain way. When we get further in life, of course I would do things. I would parent differently. I would take that trip. I would spend that money. I would stash away this money. I would move this house. I would live in this area. Like, oh man, I love where I live now. I don't live where I lived 5 years ago. I didn't know 5 years ago I would love it so much. That happens all across our lives. I think it's important to keep that perspective. And quite honestly, I've stopped punishing myself I give myself some grace on how I handled the situation while always maintaining the edge that I could have been better.
Right. And this is something I've been incredibly proud of you as a human being for, whether I was your friend or not. You've owned it from day one.
Yeah, you need to.
Owned it from day one. And that is unique. That is unique in business. Yeah. It is unique in sports. It is unique in any way of life that someone says, I could have done better. Yeah. Like you had a choice early on. Yeah. Why'd you do that?
I think for me, as I've always had the characteristic to feel responsible for whatever I'm responsible for, plus some. If you looking back, reflecting back, having the experiences that I've had, knowing now the reaction of fans, players, coaches, media to to the sign stealing stuff. You should always strive to be better than what your expectations are. You should always hold yourself to a higher bar than everybody else does. And so I was in a position of power. I was in a position of leadership. For me to be what I want to be moving forward, you have to admit when you're wrong. You have to admit when you failed, or you have to admit when you would do things differently. Some of that is advice from sort of older mentors. Some of that is just kind of how my core beliefs are and how I'm wired. And part of it, I think, is maintaining my responsibilities to protect the players. Everybody, we got caught up in a very nasty pursuit of perfection, and we're paying for it.
Okay. The positive side, you get a year off from baseball, right? Ends up being a shortened season. Right. Who knew? Right. What'd you get to experience during that year off that, you
real probably life, wouldn't have? Normal life. My youngest and oldest, time with my daughters, my time with my wife, decompress away from the sport. You start to realize how far you've taken family dinners, family breakfasts, vacations. It almost kind of recentered priorities for me, without knowing it. I think my oldest daughter would have been a freshman in college. We got an extra year with her. It was just more of a reset on priorities. And that was invaluable. I would never wish it upon anybody because of the way we got there, but the net result was a reset for me on what's important to me, the value of friendship, the value of people in your inner circle. And I was fortunate to have that at the time I did. Although I would never brag about it because it got there in the wrong way, but we tried to take the positive.
Did you think you were out of baseball at that point?
I didn't think I was out of baseball as much as I thought it would be difficult to get back in. I didn't think I was out because of the relationships I've built, the reputation I've had. One mistake, error in judgment, lack of leadership was not going to define. At that point, was like a 20-year career player and executive and manager. I spent a lot of time on the phone that year with executives around the league. One, apologizing. Two, letting them know I wanted to work again. And three, apologizing again for things they were going to have to deal with. But I didn't know what that looked like. I started making arrangements for TV, media, coaching at any level, college, whatever. But all that planning went to naught when I started getting job offers.
So you rumored you were going to be in several places, a couple that were top of the list. You end up in Detroit. How's that happen?
So relationship wise, I had some good relationships with the Tigers. I played there in 2003. They reached out during the summer and said, hey, if we have an opening, we'd love to talk to you. And that was about it. And then as the interview process went, they recruited me pretty heavily. I think part of it was, they were looking for leadership. They were looking for a new direction. I think they had access to me. I'm pretty vulnerable. I was looking for all options were on the table. And they came pretty hard after me. So it was cool to get to know that organization again. I had, like I said, I had acquaintances in the organization that jumped out first when I was free.
It didn't hurt that they did a little entertaining at Oakland Hills. I know you love to play golf. That was certainly
that's a good
highlight.
recruitment. Anytime you can bring in a top 100 course, I'm probably a yes.
All right, now you're sitting in the dugout with literally a living legend. I mean, Miguel Cabrera. Yeah. What a phenomenal career. You're getting to see him do things that very few people have done in the history of baseball. What's that like?
Yeah, it's cool. It's a unique experience. Again, part of my take you back to 17 and 19 is like, I'm going to soak up everything imaginable in the sport because it's going to be over before we know it. The sport will live on after us. 3,000 hits, 500 homers. I make our players come out in the dugout and like watch when Alex Gordon goes in the Royals Hall of Fame, put him out there. When you have retired numbers, we're going to be out there. When we celebrate Miggy, we're going to be out there. He's every bit of the superstar that you dream of, like core beliefs, his influence in the community, him being a teammate, performance on the field. Everything is really, really, really top notch. So seeing him make history, and we see the names roll on the scoreboard and be like, he passed Babe Ruth, he passed Brooks Robinson, he passed Joe DiMaggio, he passed Hank Aaron. Like, holy hell.
And he's a kid still at heart who loves the game.
Yeah.
I'll never forget, he was hurt when you all were in Houston in 21. And I got to see him sitting with the travel squad and how excited he was to watch his teammates. It's just really special to see a superstar who cares about the game.
It's cool. He's a big kid. It's his last year coming up, and he's we'll make sure he doesn't love the celebrations, but champagne toast when he got the 3,000 hits. I made him a painting. I had actually a Houston-based painter painted a nice little tribute to him. We've celebrated him as much as we can because we're going to look back in our careers and go, that 300 saves that I caught, or the near no-hitter that I caught, and when I got to manage Miguel Cabrera, when I got to manage Jose Altuve, won the batting title, that stuff will be in the book, so to speak.
Kind of looking. Well, actually, I want to go back to. I mentioned Houston a second ago. It didn't even hit me. You come back to Houston for the first time. I was there, got to see it. They play the video.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't even about me. I was emotional about it. Like, how did that feel to see how the city welcomed you back in 21?
You have no idea what impact you're making until you see the video. And they showed the speech with Harvey and the World Series and the interaction with your players, and like, it's pretty cool. When you get to feel the love coming back, it makes you a little emotional because of you missing it. Even the songs they pick, they're so good at like capturing what your timeline was with them. But fans have been great. I live here, interact with fans all the time, at pictures and run them into restaurants, coffee, bar, wherever you're at. Someone has a story or a thank you that they want to give you. And you don't know that until you come back. When you're in the middle of it, you don't probably appreciate it. But, it was cool. Even my players in Detroit were like, man, you were really influential here. You're a big deal here. You were like, they love you here in the standing ovation. You tip your cap. And again, things you try to soak up. I knew my wife and kids would be in tears. My closest friends would be emotional, and like, but it just means you matter.
Well, and to that point, you just moved into a new house in Houston. You love this city.
Love this city. Love the city. The people. Our life is here. We're going to be here. Some of that has to do with with, the experiences on the field and just the love that you get. But a lot of it has to do with just the way of life and the collection of people you surround yourself with, yourself included. Like it's home. And when it's home, regardless of whether it ends well, it doesn't end well, things are a little bit murky. I think Houston will be home forever.
Early predictions on 23 or 24 for the Tigers?
We'll be better. I got spoiled a little bit in Houston on how good we were so fast. I think the build is similar to what we had in Houston, where the young players and surround them with the right people, build a coaching staff. Hopefully I can be influential with them. And I know we're going to be a thorn in the Astros side. I know how to beat them.
Love to hear that. Scott Harris just came in.
Yeah.
How's that relationship?
Super. He's awesome. He's a younger executive who's been built in his career by really good people. Theo Epstein, Jed Hoyer, Farhan Zaidi, like the guys that have been really successful in the game. And when they're around the best, they take the best attributes. They apply them in our arena. But it's like a partnership, like any business. It's more than one person. His vision, my ability to implement that vision on the field. So good times ahead.
Awesome. All right. One word answers only. We'll close out with a few rapid fire questions. Favorite golf course?
Pebble Beach.
Pebble Beach. Not best 18-hole score. Lowest round.
75. You were there.
Okay. I was there. Hole in one?
Never. Almost the other day.
You were a foot.
I
was there.
Know,
we thought it was. We thought it was in.
I know.
Number 12, Blue Jack National. It almost went in. Wine or bourbon?
Oh man, bourbon. Because old fashioned. I have to say bourbon. I've grown so much.
You've come so far.
I know.
You've come so far. 90 proof or 115? Proof?
90 for sure. Too hot. Over 100. No bueno.
Yeah, I agree. Favorite place to have a cocktail?
Probably outside your house, in your backyard, in the meeting place. We call it the meeting place.
Yeah, Meeting Street Golf Club. I appreciate the shout out. Little Caesars or Domino's?
Little Caesars. I know who pays my bills. Are you kidding me?
Day game or night game?
Day game. If I had my choice, I've always dreamed of all day games.
All day game.
Yeah, I'll take dinner, cocktail hour over.
So you didn't like the lights at Wrigley?
No, it's day games.
I already know the answer. Analytics or gut feel?
Both. You said one word, both. One word, both. You have to have both. You can't live in either area too much.
But you have brought a lot of the analytics to the game.
For sure. Analytics. If I had to choose one of those two, I would pick analytics.
Final question. Surfing or skiing?
Neither. That's one word. So I'm not going to do either. I might do one. If I had to choose one, I would take ski over. I can't drown in snow, but the avalanche would kill me. So I'm definitely afraid of both.
Brother, I appreciate you coming here. This is awesome. Always good to catch up with you and
always
get a little further under the person.
Love it. I appreciate it.
Thanks everybody for joining us. Really appreciate it.